Good morning. Today we look at one of the most difficult passages, again, as I talked about yesterday with the crucifixion. And today we read Matthew 27, verses 27 through 50. Pilate has turned Jesus over to be crucified. And the soldiers of the governor take Jesus into the governor's headquarters. And they gather the whole cohort around them, it says, Matthew tells us. And the cohort was somewhere between 450 and 600 men. I mean, that's an awful lot of men. I mean, Jesus was offering no resistance. When they, asked, when they came, he basically gave himself up. And, but yet they've got, let's just use the 450. I mean, that's a tremendous number of soldiers. And they stripped Jesus of his own clothes and they put this scarlet robe on him. Sometimes we may hear that they put a purple robe on him, but it's a robe depicting royalty, depicting a place of honor, someone special. And they mock him. They twist a crown of thorns and put it on his head. And I mean, I've got a crown of thorns that was made from some thorny bushes up in the Pembina Gorge, and those the spikes on those thorns, some of them are 3 inches long, and they're just as sharp as can be. And I mean, you just barely touch them, and they can cause you to bleed. But they made this crown like that and put it on Jesus' head, and the pictures we see of Jesus with that crown on his head, I mean, his head is bleeding from those sharp points that are on them. And it's just the blood that he shed plus the pain that caused, I mean, just, I had a sliver in my hand the other day, and and it hurts, when you get poked and when you get cut. And so I think about the pain that Jesus went through with that. And they're mocking him. They put, as I said, that scarlet robe on him, put this crown of thorns on his head. It wasn't a crown that a king would wear, but it was a crown of mockery. It was a crown of scorn. It was just belittling him as much as they could. And it says they put a reed in his right hand and they knelt before him and mocked him with, "Hail, King of the Jews," and that these Roman soldiers, definitely wouldn't truly be honoring Jesus. But yet, they mocked him with that, "Hail, King of the Jews," and just, you've got no power over us. You're just a simple man with no power, no abilities. And then they took the reed that they had put in his hand and they strike him with that, as well as scourging him with a whip and everything else. And so after they've done this mocking and pretense, "Hail, King of the Jews," they take the scarlet robe back off and put his own clothing back on him again. And then verse 31 ends with, they led him away to crucify him, taking him out to Golgotha. And Matthew tells us that on the way, that they come across this Simon of Cyrene, and they compel this man to carry Jesus' cross. And in doing that, reading other places and knowing more about the history and everything, Simon was a Roman citizen, and so these Roman soldiers, commanded this Roman citizen to do this carrying of Jesus' cross, and it was, going against his rights. He was put in a spot where he shouldn't have been, and all of those different things. But those are all kind of beside the point. But it's a reminder for us that sometimes we need to step up and help others carry their burdens. Sometimes people find themselves in that hard spot where they need a little bit of help. In John's gospel, Jesus carries the cross all the way by himself, because Jesus doesn't need any help. But that's the differences in the Gospels. But the end result is the same. And here in Matthew's Gospel, they say when they came to the place called Golgotha, which means place of the skull, they offered him wine to drink mixed with gall that would help ease the pain, ease the agony. Jesus tasted it and he refused to drink it because he didn't want the easing at all, you know. And it says when they crucified him, they divided his clothes by casting lots, and they sat down and watched over him. And they put this sign above his head. This is Jesus, the King of the Jews. And in another telling of this, it's Pilate, or it's the governor, it's someone else. I mean, it isn't just the soldiers that decide to put this sign up there, but the sign is there. This is Jesus, the King of the Jews. Again, mocking, just showing no respect, you know, and just, you know, and these Roman soldiers, did they know any better? I mean, they were following orders, and that's what a soldier does. He follows orders, whether they really agree with those orders or not. That's a soldier's duty, to follow orders. And they follow those orders. In Matthew's Gospel, the two bandits that are crucified with him, both join in the crowd of mocking Jesus, of jeering at him, of saying to Jesus, you know, save yourself. You know, the verse 42, one of the mocking things they say is, he saved others. Can he not save himself? You know, he's the King of Israel. Let him come down, and we then will believe, you know. And then another thing they say to Jesus to try to get his goat, to get him to do something, you know, they say, he trusts in God. Let God deliver him if he wants to. Because he said, I am God's son. You know, and it's just so many things that these people, this crowd that has been stirred up for no good reason other than our salvation, but they're mocking him. They're just, you know, showing absolute scorn and distaste. And it, you know, it reminds me of reading some of the history of the early, you know, wild, wild west, and when there would be a hanging in a town that, you know, everyone would gather to watch, you know, this event. You know, it was a great event. Well, I tell you, I can't imagine that I wouldn't want to go and witness one of those, nor would I have ever wanted to witness Jesus, you know, being crucified on the cross. But as we read the Bible, we witness it, we experience it. And it's right that it makes us hurt. It's right that it pulls at our heartstrings and makes us filled with sorrow to know that they treated Jesus this way, to know that they could treat anybody this way. You know, and, you know, in another gospel, the one thief says, you know, we're guilty, we deserve this. But he's innocent, you know, this man says. We don't see that here in Matthew. So I'm kind of combining the stories, which is something we do often with the Bible. And then verse 45 says, from noon on, darkness came over the whole land until 3 o'clock in the afternoon. And then Jesus cries out with a loud voice. You know, he says, my God, why hast thou forsaken me? And so often on Good Friday, as we reenact, so to speak, the crucifixion of Jesus with the stripping of our altars in our churches, we will read Psalm 22. My bones are all out of joint. They're dried up like a potsherd. You know, and it's just, those words just bring us to that state of devastation, to that state of sorrow. But Jesus cries out to God. And with these words also, I think about the rest of Psalm 22, because the end of Psalm 22 states faith in God, trust in God. So if Jesus quoted from the beginning of Psalm 22, you know, the rest of Psalm 22 was there in his head as well, with knowing of God's faithfulness, knowing that God would never abandon him, knowing that he wasn't forsaken or forgotten by God. God doesn't forget us either. But the people, upon hearing him cry out, say, he's crying for God. Let's see if God answers. Well, see if they send Elijah to save him. And then our reading for today ends at verse 50. Jesus crying out again with a loud voice and breathed his last. Or some versions will say gave up his spirit, entrusting himself into God's care, entrusting himself to God's plan, just as he did in the garden. If it is possible, let this cup pass me by, but if not, your will, not mine, be done. So hard to imagine that the will of God would be that he would die for us. But that's what he did.